When I was a kid, I always wanted to learn how to bake bread, but I don't think I was imagining that someday I'd be baking this classic French boule with einkorn wheat. And this is my absolute favorite bread recipe to make now. And I think that you're really going to enjoy seeing how easy it really is. So let's get started. This recipe starts with a sourdough levain, which I showed you how to make in my last video. I'm going to use a spatula to gather all of the leaven and put it into a large bowl. I'm going to mix in 315 grams of warm water. You can use a spatula to do this, or you can also use the Einkorn Kneading Tool. Just want to break this up a little bit into the water. Now you're going to add 600 grams of all-purpose einkorn flour. Sprinkle a teaspoon and a half of fine sea salt on top, and then mix that up with a dough spoon or a stiff spatula. All einkorn breads are essentially no knead because the dough has to be wet enough because einkorn absorbs water slowly. So I don't use a KitchenAid mixer and I don't knead my doughs by hand because if I put my hands in here, they would get really, really sticky. So I like to use this einkorn kneading spoon. You're going to knead this until most of the flour isn't visible anymore. Cover the bowl with a plate and let that rest for 15 minutes. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use a technique that commercial bakers use to get the gluten activated in the flour. So einkorn does have gluten, although it's much weaker than regular wheat. And so turning the dough just helps to strengthen it a little bit so your dough will rise up better. If you've tried to bake einkorn bread on your own, you might have noticed that it turns out a little dense. But by using a technique called turning the dough, you'll be able to get a really nice rise and a lighter loaf of bread. Here's how you do it. Dust the counter lightly with flour. Use a bowl scraper to turn out your dough. Flatten your dough into a square. You can stretch it out. Then fold over one edge, turn it, fold over the next side, turn it, and continue like that till you've folded all four corners and then fold it in half again. Then place it back in your bowl. And you're going to do this 3 times. So let this rest for 15 minutes and then do it again. Once you've finished turning the dough and then put it back in the bowl, cover it tightly with plastic wrap. Let it rise for 3 to 5 hours. Then we're ready to shape. Your dough shouldn't double in size, but it should rise up at least 30% and look like this when it's ready to shape. In order for einkorn dough to become lighter, you need to have a wet dough. And so you need a vessel to hold it in when it proofs the second time, or else it would just kind of flop over. So to keep that nice round shape, there's 2 ways to do it. The first way is to use a banneton basket, and that's what I used to get this really nice design that you see on the cover of the cookbook. To use the banneton basket, you're gonna dust it pretty heavily with flour so that the dough doesn't stick to the basket. Then you're gonna dust your countertop with flour. Use your bowl scraper to transfer the dough to your countertop. You don't want to put flour on the top of it because it can bake into the loaf. So you've got the flour on the bottom so it doesn't stick to the countertop. This is how I shape the boule. I fold in all of the edges into the center to make a round and to basically pull the outer surface so it's nice and tight. Then I flip it over and I cup the outer edges with my hands and I push on the dough and rotate it in a circle. So what happens is the dough on the bottom eventually gets absorbed by the dough and it starts to stick to the counter. And if at any time it feels kind of damp so that your hands are sticking to it, just dip your hands in some flour. You keep turning it until you see that that bottom starts to drag a little bit. After it drags, do it 2 or 3 more times because that will seal the bottom. And it will look like this on the bottom. Then place that into your banneton basket, cover that with a linen. This is a linen couche. This won't stick to the dough. If you don't have this at home, then you should flour the bottom and put a piece of plastic wrap on it. There's another option if you don't have a banneton basket, but you have a linen. You can line a colander with the linen. This is actually my favorite way to do it. And dust the linen, then shape the loaf again. Show you how to do that one more time. Fold in the edges. Turn it over. Cup the sides. Till you feel that that dough is dragging on the countertop. That's going to tighten everything up. You can dust the top one more time. And then invert it into the linen, because the bottom will be flipped over again and the top will be on top. Then you just fold that over and let that rise for 1 hour, up to 90 minutes. You're going to put the Dutch oven into your oven with the lid on. Preheat it for at least an hour before you bake the bread. So I've got my preheated Dutch oven. I put the lid over there. Now I'm going to invert the loaf inside. Just be careful of the edges. Okay, if the bread doesn't go right into the center, just wait for about 30 seconds and then shake the pot. So I'm going to use my bread lamb to slash the top. You do that so that when the bread rises up in the oven, it keeps a nice regular round shape. Otherwise, it could kind of burst open on one side or the other. I'm going to make 4 slashes in the center of the loaf, but don't get too close to the edge, because since einkorn is the gluten is weak, it can crack all the way down. And if you didn't do a good job, you can always go over it. You don't want to do this too deep, because it will open up a lot. Now I'm going to cover that up and put it back into the oven and bake that for 40 minutes. So I've got another Dutch oven so I can show you the other type of loaf and a different way to slash the bread. So with this one, I'm going to flip the loaf right on the countertop. So I'm going to dust the counter with some flour. Open up my linen, flip the loaf onto the countertop. And then I'm just going to do, instead of 4 slashes in a square, I'm going to do an additional slash. I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And there are lots of ways to do this. You can just do some research online or look at the pictures in the cookbook. And then I'm going to pick it up and drop it in the pot. Again, if it's not in the center, you just wait for a minute for the bottom to start to firm up, and then you can move it towards the center. Cover that up and bake it for 40 minutes with the lid on. here's the loaf that I baked, that I proofed in the Banneton basket. It's got that pretty design like in the cookbook. It baked up nice and golden, really pretty. If you like a really, really dark crust, you can keep the oven at 500 for 40 minutes. It really depends on your oven. Some ovens bake hotter than others. Okay, here's the loaf that we shaped in the colander using the linen with 3 slashes down the center. Still really beautiful, baked up nice and golden and crunchy. Now we slash this 3 times and 2 so it kind of spread out a little bit, whereas this one I only slashed small slashes in the middle so it kind of rose up a little taller. But basically 2 beautiful loaves of bread. I want to show you what the inside of the bread should look like. Cut it right in half. That will give you an idea of how this bread will turn out when you're doing everything right. I love to use this bread for a number of things. I love it for breakfast with butter and jelly or olive oil and salt. I make bruschetta with it. Sometimes when we have a little left over and it's getting a little old, I actually cut it up into croutons and I fry it up in a pan with a little bit of butter, olive oil, and some herbs, and we eat it in soup or we put it on salads. You can also make breadcrumbs with it. It's really going to be your #1 bread recipe. If it's not baking up like this inside and you have a new starter, it just means you need to keep refreshing and getting your sourdough starter stronger. But don't give up, because we have thousands of people that are baking this bread with this recipe from the cookbook and having these same exact results. I know you can do it. You're going to love this bread.